You know what? I think it's official at this point, and it deserves to be said aloud. James Wan is the Steven Spielberg of horror, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. But even so, just out of wild curiosity, what's next on Mr. Wan's list? I'm so sorry. For those of you who might not have any idea what I'm talking about, James Wan is a recent discovery of a filmmaker. He made his feature film debut with the film Saw, a feature-length adaptation of a short film that he made with his partner in crime, Leigh Whannell. Now, in actuality, despite the rather grotesque reputation that the Saw franchise has gained, the first Saw movie is really not all that graphic. It's actually very well crafted, very well told, very well shot, and very well performed. And of course, it has a few moments that are a little grotesque, but it doesn't indulge in the grotesqueness of its subject matter. It's actually much more interested in being more minimalistic and more character-driven. And even when it does have moments that could have shown the incredible grossness of it, it doesn't. Rather, it implies the grossness. It's a very good example of the notion how showing less can more often than not mean showing more. And in my opinion, every single sequel of this entire series can be skipped entirely, because they're nowhere near as well made and well crafted as the very first one was. They're just a series of annually released gore fests that honestly don't do anything for me. But despite the rather nasty reputation of the Saw franchise, James Wan and Leigh Whannell have built themselves up a pretty impressive career in terms of horror movies. Pretty much every other horror movie they've made since Saw have been really well done. James Wan is a master at building atmosphere, suspense, tension, and best of all, he knows how to properly use a jump scare. The biggest problem with a lot of modern horror films is that they don't know how to be actually scary. They just shove a bunch of jump scares in your face thinking that that's scary, when really it's just obnoxious. So at this point, I think it's fair to say that if a horror movie has James Wan in the director's chair, you're guaranteed a good movie. Can the same thing be said for today's subject, The Conjuring 2? Well, yes. And no. Much like with the first movie, my general opinion on the sequel is more or less the same. It's a very well crafted, beautifully atmospheric horror film with certain elements and themes that I don't really agree with. It's not enough to make me discredit the movie for being as well crafted as it is, but it is enough to make me not want to give it a complete recommendation for everyone. Based upon quote-unquote actual case findings of the Warrens, whom, if you're not familiar, were a pair of paranormal investigators mostly popular in the 1970s, as they investigated a case of a supposed haunted house in England. A family is being tormented by a strange ghost who wants them out of his house, and is constantly pursuing them even when they do leave the house. And what they find will test all of their abilities and their convictions. First, let me get all the good things out of the way, and trust me, there is more good than bad in this movie. Like you would expect from a well-crafted James Wan film, it is beautifully atmospheric, the cinematography is gorgeous, the characters are interesting and sympathetic, the ghosts are genuinely scary, and if there is one thing that the movie does well constantly, it's building up tension for every single moment you're watching it. The music is as creepy and as fear-inducing as you would expect. The special effects are very well done. And everyone's performance, including a little girl, is top-notch. All these elements make for a very well-crafted horror film that I did enjoy and was genuinely scared. Having said that, this particular series contains a few themes and elements that I personally don't really agree with, and am frankly getting really sick of seeing in movies like this. Much like with the first movie, the sequel has a constant undertone of the power of absolute faith, particularly that of Christianity, and seems to perpetuate the notion of the church's constant goodness. Which, if you know anything about history, particularly about this particular faith, you know there is nothing constantly good about it.
Expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Please understand, it is not my intention to insult any of my viewers who may or may not be practicing this particular faith. It's just that, while I do see the good value in it for storytelling, I just wish that they would try to incorporate different spiritual ideas, like, say, I don't know, Buddhism. Another thing I don't like about both movies is the way it chooses to portray its skeptical characters. The characters who might otherwise be considered the voice of reason, or the outside opinion, or the second opinion, or the aspect of something that makes it much more tense, much more interesting. The best kind of skeptical character, in my opinion, is the one who is aware that they're skeptical, but is also aware of the value that the other side has, and makes no effort to be a jackass about it. The skeptical characters in both of these movies are nothing but complete one-dimensional jackasses, which in my mind not only serves to be insulting to actual skeptics like myself, but also serves to make the movie not as interesting as it could be. Granted, the main point of both movies is to ensure that in this particular universe, there are paranormal activities, there are actual ghost hunters, and there are actual means of exorcising evil demons and evil spirits. But because both movies tout the notion that they're based on actual case findings, I can't help but feel like that there seems to be a certain undertone to both movies that's trying to perpetuate a certain belief or a certain idea that I, and very likely a lot of other viewers, don't necessarily agree with. I think that maybe if they just made the skeptical characters a bit more three-dimensional and maybe made the hauntings and the ghostly aspects of it a bit more ambiguous, it might have been a little better in my opinion. But as both movies stand, I still recommend them as really genuinely well-made horror films, but I would also highly recommend that you take each and every one of them with a grain of salt. So my personal recommendation is if you're really interested in seeing a well-crafted horror movie in theaters this summer, I'd say give it a shot. At the very least, it's most likely going to be a lot better than certain other horror movies we can look forward to this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I am The Norm. Thank you all for watching.